Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about the Fabian Society. What is the Fabian Society? The Fabian Society is a British socialist organisation whose purpose it is to advance the principles of democratic socialism, as they call it, via gradualist and reformist efforts in democracies, rather than by revolutionary overthrow, as say is the case with communism. As one of the founding organisations of the Labour Representation Committee in 1900, it has had an important influence upon the British Labour Party, which grew from it. The Fabian Society has also had a massive impact on British politics as a whole. Now, the Fabian Society was named at the suggestion of Frank Podmore in honour of the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus. His Fabian strategy sought general and gradual victory against the superior Carthaginian army under the renowned general Hannibal through persistence, harassment, and wearing down the enemy by attrition. The original Fabian coat of arms is the wolf in sheep's clothing, and it's actually known by that name. It's actually called the wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, according to author John Perdue, the logo of the Fabian Society, a tortoise, is representing the group's predilection for a slow, imperceptible transition to socialism, while its coat of arms, a wolf in sheep's clothing, represented its preferable methodology, the preferred methodology for achieving its goal. The Fabian Society also founded the London School of Economics and Political Science in 1895. And what's interesting about that is the majority of people that study there end up becoming world leaders in their own countries, in third world countries most of the time as well. And they then implement these very same things that they've been indoctrinated with at the LSE. Now, the society functions primarily as a think tank, at least that's what they call themselves. All of these groups always call themselves think tanks, and it's one of 21 socialist societies in the UK. Similar societies exist in Australia, such as the Australian Fabian Society, in Canada, under the Douglas Coldwell Foundation. That's a very important organisation. Look that up. If you are in Canada, study on this. And also the now disbanded League for Social Reconstruction. They also exist in Sicily as the Sicilian Fabian Society and in New Zealand as the New Zealand Fabian Society. And in fact, it doesn't stop there. Members of the Fabian Society have included political leaders from countries that were formerly part of the British Empire, such as India and Pakistan as well. So with leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who adopted Fabian principles as part of their political ideologies. Now, in the period between the two world wars, as I talked about a little bit, the second generation of Fabians emerged. Many of the future leaders of the Third World were exposed to Fabian thought, as we talked about. Most notably, India's Jawaharlal Nehru, who subsequently framed economic policy for India on Fabian socialist lines. After independence from Britain, or supposed independence, Nehru's Fabian ideas committed India to an economy in which the state owned, operated and controlled the means of production. It's a less known fact that the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was also an avid member of the Fabian Society in the early 1930s. Another interesting factoid, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, is that the first Fabian Society pamphlets advocated for social justice. These pamphlets were printed in the 1900s, the early 1900s. And the term social justice is a phrase that we are now suddenly beginning to become aware of, aren't we? And this same pamphlet, by the way, or series of pamphlets which they released, but the first one also called for a series of reforms during the early 1900s, including eugenicist policies. Okay, they wanted governments to adopt eugenicist policies. They were advocating for eugenics again. In the early 1900s, Fabian Society members advocated for the ideal of a scientifically planned society. Okay, they were all in favor of sterilizing people. The Fabian Society was founded on the 4th of January in 1884 in London as an offshoot of a society founded a year earlier called the Fellowship of the New Life. The Fellowship of the New Life was founded in 1883, and their objective was the cultivation of a perfect character in each and all. At one meeting of the Fellowship, the Vita Nuova was created and adopted by the group's members. This basic document formed the core set of beliefs held by the society. The object or objective was the cultivation of perfect character in each and all. The principle, the subordination of material things to spiritual things. Fellowship. The sole and essential condition of fellowship shall be a single-minded, sincere and strenuous devotion to the object and principle. Design. The promotion by both practice and precept of the following methods of contributing toward the attainment of that end. The supplanting of the spirit of competition and self-seeking by that of unselfish regard. They go on to talk about the simplicity of living, the highest and completest education of the young. Of particular interest in this organization, the preceding organization, the Fellowship organization, which later became the Fabian Society. So, members of the Fellowship wanted to become politically involved to, as they put it, aid society's transformation. So, all members were free to attend both societies. Now, the Fellowship of the New Life was dissolved in 1899, but the Fabian Society grew to become the pre-eminent academic society in the UK in the Edwardian era. And governments across the world, by the way, adopted their principles. Wholesale. They didn't even question them, they just adopted them. Of particular interest are the two founding members of this secret society, Henry Havelock Ellis and his wife Edith Ellis. Havelock Ellis was an English physician and sexologist. He was the co-author of the first medical textbook in English on homosexuality in 1897, and he actually pushed for normalizing it, normalizing the practice. And he also published works on a variety of sexual practices and inclinations, as well as transgender psychology. So most of the stuff that's out there in the field of psychoanalysis on these matters, that's propagated even now, that all came out of Henry Havelock Ellis's work. He is also credited with introducing the notions of narcissism and autoeroticism, which were later adopted by psychoanalysis. Ellis was among the pioneering investigators of psychedelic drugs and the author of one of the first written reports to the public about an experience with mescaline, which he conducted on himself in 1896. Okay, this guy was a eugenicist. In fact, to prove this point, I can tell you that if you look up this guy's biography, you'll find that he served as the president of the Eugenics Society. Now, Edith Ellis, his wife, was a lecturer, writer, secretary, and general factotum of Fellowship House. Their open marriage was the central subject in Havelock Ellis's autobiography, My Life, which was published in 1939. Edith Ellis was among the first people to push for a conflation of feminism, socialism, and the LGBT or gay agenda. Okay? These people were ideologically driven. This is where the Fabian Society came from, because both husband and wife later became central key members in the offshoot organization, the Fabian Society, as well. And right now you've got current governments across the world, in the UK, Canada, Australia, Germany, balls deep in this organization, as well as the Club of Rome. So until people start understanding these organizations and their roles in what is going on, right? Until they understand that the ideologies that are being perpetuated by various forms of identity politics, who's pushing that, why they're pushing that, why they're creating the schisms in society, why governments are becoming increasingly totalitarian, nothing's going to change. Now, Bertrand Russell is an interesting chap because he became a member of the society briefly, but he resigned after he expressed his belief that the society's principles of entente, in this case between countries allying themselves against Germany, could lead to war, which is exactly what happened. Bertrand Russell went on further to try and explain to the people, although it was kind of futile. He went on to tell people that the First World War and the Second World War were primarily the creations of the Fabian Society. Right? And that Britain would end up at war, particularly with World War I. Britain would end up at war, which is exactly what happened. Now, at the core of the Fabian Society, aside from the married couple that we talked about, were Sidney and Beatrice Webb. They were instrumental, particularly in the second generation of Fabians, which I'll talk about in a second as well. They were instrumental in pushing foreign leaders particularly, but also domestic governments, to accept their version of economic policy. Okay, they wrote a number of studies, including alternatives to the current systems of capitalism. So they proposed alternative cooperative economics that applied to ownership of capital as well as land. To explain this to you in basic terms, they believed that all capital should be communally owned, but not owned by the people, but by governments. H.G. Wells, I was going to say something about H.G. Wells as well, because some people mention H.G. Wells and how he was a member of the Fabian Society, and that is true. But he was a member from 1903 to 1908. 5 years. A very brief period of time. He became a vehement vocal critic of its operations. He published a paper in 1905, and most people won't have read it. He published a paper called The Faults of the Fabian, and he detailed what was wrong with the Fabians' ideology. Then he parodied the society in his 1910 novel, The New Machiavelli. He was not a fan of them. Once he understood what it was all about, he realized that he needed to make the public aware. If you list the number of people that have tried to bring this to people's attention, right? We've got Bertrand Russell, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, H.G. Wells. Each one of them has been ignored by society at large. Each one of them.